Hello, gardeners, and happy Tuesday, May 11th. Welcome to Gabbing About Gardening. I'm your host, Lucretia Schanfarber. Thank you to Willow, the all-woman band from Quadra Island, for providing the lovely theme music called C minor for our show. Oh, you know, every day something new is happening in our gardens, in the forests, and in the fields around us. The peony buds are getting plumper. The poppies are already blooming. The fig leaves are finally opening up, and just this morning I counted hundreds of tiny baby figs on our trees. It's going to be another great year for figs. And my tomato plants, well, to be perfectly honest, I am possibly the world's worst tomato grower. I always seem to plant my seeds way too early or way too late. I usually end up begging or buying tomato plants. Fortunately, a few friends take pity on me and pass along their extra plants, but even then I struggle to keep them healthy and happy. Well, our first guest, Arzeena Hamir, knows all about growing tomatoes. She actually knows all about growing just about everything because she does it professionally as a market gardener. Arzina's going to take a little break from her Amara Farm Market Gardens and Produce stand in Courtney to gab about her no-fail tips for growing terrific tomatoes. Then we'll check in with Marnie Andrews. Marnie is not only the owner of a great little bookstore called none other than Marnie's Books in downtown Manson's Landing on Cortez Island, she is also a longtime gardener, and Marnie is going to gab about a few of her all-time favorite gardening books. We're also going to gab with biologist Steve Mooney in Campbell River. Steve has a rather different perspective when it comes to so-called invasive plants. He understands and appreciates the valuable role they have in healing disturbed soil. Steve is going to gab about some of the wild plants we love to hate, and maybe, just maybe, we will see them more as friends than foes. Then we're going to have a quick little gab with Melissa Rickey, a professional gardener and permaculture advocate here on Cortez Island. I just love the relaxed and joyful attitude Melissa has about gardening. And I love her enthusiasm about composting. I always learn something when I gab with Melissa. So that's all coming up today on Gabbing About Gardening. Gabbing About Gardening is sponsored by Speedy Bin Compost Bins. Go to speedybin.com to learn about the wonderful compost bins made by Speedy Bin in Merville on Vancouver Island. Joyce and her family have been making Speedy Bins for more than 30 years. They are rat-proof. They are raccoon-proof. They're even idiot-proof. Anyone can compost with a Speedy Bin. That's speedybin.com. The worms and your garden will love you for it. And thank you to all of our garden club sponsors, Cortez Island Garden Club, Quadra Island Garden Club, Campbell River Garden Club, and our newest garden club sponsor is Qualicum Beach Garden Club. Thank you all for your support. Coming up, Arzeena Hamir. Arzeena is going to really help me up my tomato game. Arzeena, are you with us there?
I am. Nice to hear from you.
Lovely to reconnect with you. I need you, Arzeena. Yeah. I mean, you really have helped me through the years as a professional gardener. You grow hundreds of kilos of produce at your own family farm, leafy greens, blueberries, strawberries. I was looking on the website, everything you're growing, raspberries, asparagus, broccoli, and tomatoes. Delicious tomatoes.
Yeah.
I need help.
Okay.
I'm a terrible tomato grower. What can I do to be a terrific tomato grower like you?
Okay. Let's start from the beginning. So, I think for gardeners, a few things to just keep in mind. I mean, first of all, tomatoes are probably the number one thing that home gardeners want to grow. So, getting it right is going to lead to so much more satisfaction in the garden. So before, getting into the how, let's, just talk a little bit about the tomato plant. So for those of you who don't know, tomatoes don't normally grow in our part of the world. They are a hot, dry climate crop. That's where they really prefer to grow, and that's where they originated. So if you can think Central America, Mexico area, that's the climate that they like to grow in. The fact that we can actually grow tomatoes this far north in a rainforest is just, you have to praise gardeners for the selection and the lengths that we sometimes have to go to in order to get production.
Well, and I guess a lot of annuals are like that, aren't they, Arzina?
Yeah, they are.
Which is why I do a lot of perennials in my garden. But hey, so potatoes and peppers sort of fall in that range a bit too?
They absolutely do. So tomatoes are in the potato, pepper, eggplant family. So that's another thing to keep in mind, because sometimes there are diseases and pests that travel between those, crops. And so planning your garden means really looking at rotations if that's possible. So especially when it comes to disease management, there is a very difficult disease called late blight that shows up in tomatoes around August, September time. And if you get it on your plants, generally the spores then fall onto the soil, and it's very difficult for you to continue to grow tomatoes or potatoes in that soil. So, practicing a crop rotation, or if you're planting tomatoes in containers, because they do grow well in large 5-gallon plus size containers. If you do get disease, do recycle that soil somewhere else in the garden and start fresh with brand new soil, because those disease spores can travel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I just hate admitting this publicly, but I have not even started my tomato plant. I barely started them. Obviously, I'm going to need to buy plants. Or, if they're just like 2 inches up, is there any hope for me at this point?
Oh, yeah. No, if they're 2 inches up, you're fine. Don't worry. You'll get a slightly later crop. But, especially if those are the varieties that you really like and you can't find them anywhere else, just keep going with those. They grow very, very quickly. So I would not worry.
Oh, you're encouraging me.
To back up a bit, we on our farm start our seed mid-March because we have greenhouses that we can grow our tomatoes in. And, growing in a greenhouse gives you a 1-month advantage over not growing in a greenhouse. So, the timing of when you start your tomatoes really has to correlate with if you're growing your tomatoes outside, uncovered, or if you've got some covering to allow them to be transplanted.
And you advise covering, don't you? So even if you put them outside.
Yeah. I do. Because again, the diseases I was talking about, late blight, they come with the water and the rain that hits the tomato. Tomatoes don't like to have their leaves wet. So some time of cover, it doesn't have to be a formal greenhouse. It can just be, a plastic lean-to, or even, if you grow your tomatoes in pots against the eaves of your house, and, the eaves keep the water off of the plant itself. That's all you need.
Oh, that's a great idea.
To keep your plant dry.
Oh, I can do that on the
dryness is really what they're going after. And, being a fruiting vegetable, you want to have them, if you can, 8 hours of direct sun.
Okay. What varieties are your favorites? What are you growing?
Well, there's varieties that we grow because we can grow it well. And we primarily focus on cherry tomatoes here on our farm because they're very productive. We can sell them really easily. And, they do come in a number of different colors and striping and shapes. And so we enjoy growing cherry tomatoes. They are what's called an indeterminate tomato. So they're a vining. They keep on adding a leaf truss and then a flowering truss, and then a leaf truss, and they will keep on going. And that's another thing to keep in mind. Tomatoes are actually perennials in the tropics, like in Mexico, Central America. They will want to continue growing, especially if they're indeterminate. So having a really good staking system is incredibly important, because our tomatoes get 8, 9 plus feet tall. So we actually grow them on a string and twine them up a string. But in order to do that, you actually have to do a fair amount of pruning, because tomatoes do put off a lot of suckers.
By the way, I love following your Facebook page and checking out what's happening on your website, because your pictures are just fabulous.
Oh, thank you.
It's like eye candy.
I try and capture, just day-to-day stuff that interests me. So I'm so happy that it also interests you as well.
Yeah, well, it's real encouraging, even if I can't seem to do it myself. So let's talk about the pruning.
So the pruning happens only on indeterminate or vining tomatoes. So just so we're clear, most paste or early tomatoes are usually determinate. They're bush types. You don't want to be pruning those. You want to be pruning the vining or the indeterminate types. And what happens is you have a main stem, and it's easy to follow when the plants are young. You see the first stem coming up. But in the axil of each of the leaves is a little sprout that wants to form a brand new plant and grow off in its whole new direction. And if you let it grow, what happens is, first of all, it really increases the weight of the plant. You start to get this very messy, large-scale bush of a plant. It restricts airflow, having all of those suckers form their own leaves and their own fruiting trusses, and it actually delays fruit ripening. So I know it sounds difficult to understand, but having too many tomatoes on your plant, having too many fruit, it stresses the plant, and you get fewer ripening tomatoes than if you took some, those trusses, those suckers off. So every time you see along the main stem a point where there's plant material going in 3 directions, that's kind of what I tell people. Like, you see a leaf going to the left, and in kind of the armpit of the leaf is a brand new plant. Those you want to pinch off. Mm-hmm. And when they're young, you can just use your nail, pinch them off with your fingers. If they've kind of gone a little bit too far, it might require you to bring in some snippers or scissors and cut them off. But this is an activity that we do on the farm every 2 weeks, because the tomatoes are constantly wanting to put on new suckers. So when you're pruning 300 plus tomato plants, your nails turn quite black after the day. So it's quite an interesting phenomenon. But yeah, you do have to keep on top of it, so that you don't have such an unruly tomato plant. I
guess you just get in the flow of it, and it's like pinch, 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 and you just keep going. 300 tomatoes are a lot of tomatoes, Arzina.
It's a lot, right? So, do like a sucker Saturday or, a pruning day to the day, every 2 weeks, to just go in and check what is happening with the suckers on this vining plant. Let's clean it up. And, when you catch them young and small, it's such an easier job than if sometimes when they grow, it's hard to tell which is the main truss and which is the sucker. So try not to let it go that far.
Okay. And it sounds like it really pays off in the harvest to have a sucker Saturday. I love that. I think that's a meme waiting to happen. What about feeding? At what stage do we start feeding these de-suckered tomato plants?
Sure. And I'm going to back up a bit, because we start feeding even from the time of planting the seed. We add some organic fertilizers like a Gaia 444 in the potting mix that we use, so that the plant there has enough nutrients even when it's just starting out. I think how quickly tomatoes grow, right? So I actually rate them as a medium to heavy feeder, just because of how quickly they grow and how long that we have them, right? So if you're starting tomatoes in March, you're going to have them well into September. They're there for a long time. So every time we pot up, we refresh the potting mix with brand new fertilizer. And we try and only pot up once. So we have a tray when we start our seedlings. We pot up into a 4-inch pot and then keep them there in the 4-inch pot for no more than 4 or 5 weeks. And then they go into the ground. So if it helps for you, Lou, to work backwards, I don't recommend planting tomatoes. If you don't have a greenhouse, don't plant your tomatoes outside before the May long weekend. So if that's the case, work backwards from May long weekend. It's going to be 4 or 5 weeks in a 4-inch pot and then another 4 weeks in a flat. So you're going to be probably starting your tomatoes, between, probably 6 to 8 weeks before they are going to go in the ground.
And I could even just keep them in the greenhouse or up on the deck because I'm getting such a late start. Well, Aaron Stevens, he's a good friend of yours as well from Nature's Path. He's going to be on Gabbing About Gardening, the Zoom gathering next week, doing a tour of his garden and a tutorial. There's a picture of him on the Gabbing About Gardening Facebook page holding... You saw this humongous, it had to be a 2-pound tomato. It's a heart-shaped tomato. And he, bless his heart, sent me these beautiful seeds for this heart-shaped tomato.
Oh, beautiful.
And they're the ones that are up an inch. And I just don't have the heart to tell him, I planted them so late. So I'm hoping that they will still come along with your tips.
I think you will you'll get some good fruit off of it. The big thing is to remember, because they're a fruiting plant, you want to, as the season progresses, start to put more potassium in your mix, and you can cut back a little bit on the nitrogen because you're trying to really stimulate the fruiting production. So, there's that old adage when you transplant a tomato to put a banana peel in the hole.
Right.
And that's particularly what it's for, is to add that potassium so that you've got some good amount of potassium close to the roots where the plant can get it, and that really helps the fruit development on a vegetative plant.
Perfect. Those are great, great tips. I also have been reading about making your own fertilizer, and there's a little bit of an ooh factor for some people, but it's with wood ash from the fireplace and your own human urine. Have you heard about that?
I have heard about it. I can't say that I made it myself, but both of those are in plentiful quantity in this part of the world where most of us have some type of wood fire. Wood ash is a very good potassium source. Urine has both nitrogen and phosphorus. So your macronutrients are pretty well covered with those two ingredients. And then the urine is on the acidic side, where the wood ash is quite alkaline. So I would hope, help balance each other out, so that, the right pH is there in terms of the plant being able to take up those nutrients.
So it does make sense. That's good to know. I mean, it was published in Scientific American, so I thought, there's got to be some validity. I am feeling so much more confident after talking to you, Arzina. Thank you so very much for joining us today.
And this season being so cold, you are probably going to be well ahead of folks who tried putting their tomatoes outside a couple of weeks ago.
Oh,
They're going to be chilly little plants. So I think you're going to be fine.
Oh, gosh, you made my day. Thank you. We'll gab again soon. There's so much more advice I need from you, Arzina. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk soon.
Good to talk to you, Liz.
You too. Okay. Bye-bye. I've been talking with Arzina Hamir from her family farm, Amera Farms, in Courtenay. And when we come back, we'll gab with Marnie Andrews from Marnie's Books in Manson's Landing on Cortez Island. Marnie loves to gab about her favorite books, and she has a few quite a few, actually, when it comes to gabbing. She'll tell us about them in just a minute. Don't go away. We're coming right back. This is Gabbing About Gardening on CKTZ, Cortez Radio, 89.5 FM.
Carry on, regardless of what everyone else says, 'cause you are the one who knows your own heart, and it's you that must decide, and it's you that must decide. We'll carry on, regardless of what everyone else says. Let your heart and soul be your only guide, and it's you that must decide, and it's you that must decide. Well,
Welcome back to Gabbing About Gardening. Oh, I love Marnie's bookstore on Cortez Island. It's a cozy, friendly place, and Marnie is always there, happy to gab about the books she's most excited about. Marnie's on the line with us now from her bookstore in Manson's Landing. Hi, Marnie.
Hey, Lucretia. Hi.
Hi. Thanks so much for taking the time to gab. So, hey, just launch into telling us about some of your garden books.
Okay, sure. I'm going to say, I think my favorite gardening book I have many. I love gardening and I love gardening books. But my favorite gardening book is Backyard Bounty by Linda Gilkinson.
Mm-hmm.
And Linda's a Salt Spring gardener. She's gardened for decades, and 30 years, 3 decades of them on Salt Spring, so in the West Coast climate. She's also got her PhD in entomology, so she's got lots of good, helpful information about the pests that we get, and the good ones, too.
Yeah,
And,
I'm a huge fan of hers, too. In fact, I got her book from you. You introduced me to Linda Gilkinson many years ago, so thank you for that.
Oh, well, I'm glad. That's great. Hey, when I first started gardening in the 70s, my first mentor was a woman who had grown up in Britain, and her parents were market gardeners. And when I met her, and I was, 18, I knew nothing about gardening, and I just wanted help to get started. And she said, this was on Haida Gwaii, so again, a very maritime, mild climate. She said, you can eat fresh out of your garden every day of the year. And I, what? Really? And sure enough, that was, territorial seeds wasn't happening yet, which is, they brought a lot of, those European, the Dutch and the British seeds here. But she was ordering from Sutton's in England at the time. So I went in with her and we got all these wonderful varieties of overwintering brassicas and onions and winter beets and winter carrots, Dutch seed. And sure enough, you could eat fresh out of your garden every day of the year. So that was really exciting to me. And it really surprised me that so few people did it, that most Canadian seed companies at that time and most Canadian gardeners were gardening more with the, one big plant, one big harvest, quiet, dormant all winter. So when I met Linda Gilkinson, I think I must have run into her books at some point. I think actually Frank Curtis first had one of her self-published books. And we were so excited because it had all about winter gardening. And then I got to hear her speak on Quadra Island. And I was just blown away because she is a master of all of this. Like she really, really keeps good records, can tell you just how things work, how they've worked in an average year, what range we get beyond an average year. It's brilliant. And so
I'm totally with you on how brilliant Backyard Bounty is. And Linda's book, which you carry, I take it, because I got it there. Yeah, good. So I hope you have plenty in stock. I have a feeling people are going to want it.
Well, I have a few. She updated it in 2018, and it's incredible. It's great. She's got all the newer stuff about no-dig gardening, about the the micro life in the soil and not to disturb it. Yeah. Anyways, I really...
And she's really the one, as you said, who brought that whole concept of gardening year round. The whole winter gardening thing is really based on her teaching a lot.
Well, actually, Steve Solomon, I think, was the first one that I saw it written. Like my British friend did it, and that was fun. But maybe in the 80s or 90s, can't remember when Steve wrote Gardening West of the Cascades, but that was the premise of his book. It's like, hey, you guys, west of the Cascades, we have a whole different climate. We can do it differently. He was in Oregon, But still, that book really spoke to a lot of us for sure and gave a lot of information.
Yeah.
But
Steve Solomon, do you carry that Steve Solomon book too,
yes,
Marnie?
I
Okay,
love
good. So Steve
too.
Solomon, Linda Gilkinson, you have time for one more.
I'll say anything Joel Salatin writes is quite wonderful. Des Kennedy is great just to really have a good laugh, but also, more about growing beautiful gardens and the ups and downs of that. Christopher Lloyd's Gardening Year is a beautiful book. A British gardener. He's gone now, but more about ornamentals. Very funny, too.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 authors. So that's Linda Gilkinson, Steve Solomon, Joel Salatin, Des Kennedy, Christopher Lloyd, and it sounds like Backyard Bounty might be your number one choice if people drop in and look for that.
Lucretia, I think Backyard Bounty is exceptional for a beginner gardener or for an advanced gardener. She has something to say to everyone. I can open this book anytime and get, more. A lot of books, you'll read through them once and you get what they have to say, and that's kind of it.
Yep, I couldn't agree with you more, Marnie.
Yeah,
Thank you. Hey, I'm hoping that you'll come back and give us an update on more gardening books. There's so many wonderful choices. Thanks so much for joining us today on Gabbing About Gardening, Marnie.
Okay, thanks, Lou. Thanks for what you do.
That is Marnie Andrews from her lovely bookstore, Marnie's Books on Cortes Island. And up next is a biologist who sees things quite differently than most people when it comes to so-called invasive plants. I'm Lucretia. You're tuned in to Gabbing About Gardening on CKTZ Cortes Radio 89.5. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
When I was a curly-headed baby, my daddy sat me down upon his knee. Said, son, you go to school and learn your letters. Don't you be no dusty minor boy like me. Well, I was born and raised at the mouth of the Hazard Holler. Coal cars roaring and a rumble past my door. Now they stand in a row, all rust and empty, and the other end don't stop here anymore. I think my daddy was a black man, had script enough to buy the company store. Now he goes to town with empty pockets, and his face is white as a February snow. Well, I was born and raised at the mouth of the Hazard Holler. Coal cars roaring and a rumble past my door. Now they stand in a row.
Well, hello, and welcome back to Gabbing About Gardening. We've all done battle with unwanted plants in our gardens. There's buttercups, horsetail, bindweed, and along the roadsides we've come to hate the sight of broom and other so-called invasive plants. But maybe those plants have a role to play in our lives. Maybe they are telling us something about our soil and our damaged environment that we actually need to be listening to. Steve Mooney is a biologist living in Campbell River who understands the value of plants that help heal disturbed and abused soil. Steve, welcome to Gabbing About Gardening. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Lou.
So nice to have you with us. The last time we were together, you just really got me on a whole new way of thinking about plants. Could you just gab about that perspective, about
sure.
About invasives?
What we've been doing for 12,000 years since the agricultural revolution is having a little spasm. Every time we see a weed, we rip it out. We go, it's taking over. It's taking over. They're all taking over. And as a result of that, farmers, agriculturalists, particularly for their hay crops, they've been behind the impetus really to stop the spread, stop the taking over of these European mostly invasive weeds. Invasive. What is that? That all plants are invasive. So it's really a difficult process to go through to get over why is there this emotion involved? What's going on with our eradication regime? And as you said, many of those plants, fix nitrogen, only grow on disturbed soils or damaged soils, particularly overgrazed and agricultural soils. So, as gardeners, we hate them. We don't want them. But we're never going to win, particularly with a chemical war. I mean, that's never happened. We're not winning. We're losing. So at some point, we should look at what these plants do and what they do for damaged soils and how they replenish the microbes and break up compacted soils and release more nutrients into an environment that's otherwise destroyed.
So really, they're kind of the next stage of repair. So, like when there's been a road cut, we often see broom popping up as one of the first plants. I guess the seeds have come to the surface, or
usually on the machine it's done the cutting of the road. Because they pop into those bogey wheels and into the treads of the cat and the heavy cat equipment, and only release when they pop onto a rock and all the soil they previously accumulated pops out. So the machines themselves are often that's why it's so ironic. They'll send in a hoe to eradicate broom, and it's just releasing more seed into the soil and compacting it and further degrading it.
And we started that problem in the first place. That's sort of this crazy cycle.
We're left on its own, like the broom particularly. I mean, there are lots of places on Quadra and Cortez and Vancouver Island where once there was a huge patch of broom, and now we're dominated by alder or conifers or whatever else is growing there, regardless of the efforts to, eradicate it. So, the proponents will say, well, look, we got rid of the broom, so the other stuff could grow. Nah, if you have actually a control and you look at that a little bit more rationally, it's just, we can't stop our particular environment from being a forest.
So are you saying that there's actually a succession of plants that come in after soil's damaged, it kind of repairs the soil, and then at a certain point, the other trees just grow so big they just kind of shade out those plants?
Exactly. I mean, we, particularly here, right on the southern edge of the true rainforest, we have a seasonal rainforest here. So the dry, hot weather favors broom, but doesn't favor the plants that shade them so much. But alder normally will grow in before other species on truly damaged soils. Stuff that's been logged with a lot of ground lead and has churned up the strata that normally exist and compacted the clay soils. Broom will grow on that, and it will start popping nitrogen to there, which will decompose that incorporated organic matter and start creating a tilth. And once the alder grows in, then alder will shade out the broom and further nitrify the soil. Alder only lasts about 60 years and then dies. And it's exceptionally another rotation. There's not really truly a climax here because of our fire cycles. But if there was bare ground, then we would naturally have Douglas fir doing both the job of the alder and the other conifers. Mm-hmm. But Douglas fir needs nice clean ground, can't have any shade suppression, except for the southern areas of our area.
And as you talk about this, I'm thinking it makes absolute sense. It's sort of this beautiful cycle of life, but have we been sold a bill of goods on this whole hysteria around certain plants?
I mean, if you just go through the species one by one of so-called invasives, you tend to ignore the stuff that we use, like orchard grass or timothy or Yorkshire fog or any of the other dominant Eurasian grasses that take over. We leave those alone, but we will attack let's say, St. John's wort, or hairy cat's ear, or dandelion, or what's another one they really have a big hate on for? They destroy the palatability of hay. That's all they do to us. So they decrease the yield of hay farmers, and cause the hay to be the livestock to be disapproving of it, and other than that, aren't taking over anything, because our environments are not natural, and the ones that are the natural soils, the natural, are dominated by fungi, and 50-50 fungi bacteria, decomposition, and there isn't wet bare soil for most of these Eurasian invasives to take over on. The other qualities are just plain old OCD emotion. As I said, hate. Oh, that ivy is taking over. It's destroying those trees. Not a healthy tree that's growing, it doesn't. But trees that are already shade suppressed, yes, it will. And where does that ivy come from? Every one of those ivy patches started in somebody's garden. Mm-hmm. If it was 100 years ago or later, it still spread from a patch. And up coast, as you go farther and farther into the natural dominated forest, the ivy is shaded out mostly, but there'll still be a few tendrils hanging on in an old homestead, and you can tell, there's old bits of an old cabin there, and a few Spanish bluebells or some daffodils. Mm-hmm. And then these are the ivy. Oh my God, it's taking over.
Well, for some people it does take over. So,
where are they living? They're living in a Bronze Age landscape where they're trying to do some sort of tampering with nature. Mm-hmm. So they're not, out there with oxen and a scratch plow, but they're certainly, planting this and growing that, and this gets pulled out, and that leaf gets left.
You're really looking at things from obviously from a biologist perspective, and a much broader perspective on how plants actually cooperate with each other. The broom is fixing nitrogen, and sometimes these plants show up for their own purposes, and maybe we shouldn't have this attitude so immediately. Let's get in and destroy them and spray poisons and get rid of them at any cost. Steve, Japanese knotweed, it's not a huge problem on the islands.
No, most of our Japanese knotweed's not fertile. So it doesn't spread from seeds. It spreads from rhizomes. So the worst, Port Alice has got the worst one I've ever seen, hectares of knotweed dominated landscape. But that's all because they ripped up the knotweed and dumped it someplace else, and ripped up the knotweed and dumped it. So the place where they ripped it up still has knotweed, and then they just created more by dumping more of it, out on the back road. So
here, human alert. The Japanese, I remember you showing me those slides. We are actually not just me, but when you spoke at the Quadra Island Garden Club and the Cortes Island Club, you had these slides of them pulling out the knotweed, cutting it up, and dumping it somewhere else, and lo and behold, that whole area became knotweed.
Precisely, these knotweed's not fertile, so it doesn't spread from seeds. It spreads from rhizomes. So the worst, Port Alice has got the worst one I've ever seen. Hectares of knotweed dominated landscape, but that's all because they ripped up the knotweed and dumped it someplace else, and ripped up the knotweed and dumped it. So the place where they ripped it up still has knotweed, and then they just created more by dumping more of it, out on the back road.
So you're saying there was actually a racist component to the hate on for Japanese knotweed?
Well, certainly. I mean, if you consider, our origins, the Indo-Europeans, the Amnaya, who went across Europe with plow and livestock, displacing the Neolithic hunter-gatherers and farmers. The attitude that came from there, our clan above the roof. My brother before my cousins before my neighbors, and my neighbors before the guys who lived down the road. I mean, so we still have an element of us versus them, and weeds are definitely them.
Well, Michael Pollan, back in, I think, 1994, wrote a phenomenal article for the New York Times about the rise of nativism, which I think is what you're referring to here. And not that I absolutely love our native plants. I really want to promote them and propagate them and keep them growing. But there does seem to be this sort of approach that Michael Pollan really referred to as a little bit out of line, considering that we all came from somewhere else, as Nancy Turner says.
Exactly. Well, and where he's writing from, where the invasive plant movement is really orthodoxy and gospel. The biggest problem is the earthworms. I mean, they're destroying the tilth. Carolinian forests that drop their leaves every year, those leaves are getting consumed super rapidly by invasive night crawlers, by European earthworms. And so their tilth is disappearing, and so the native plants are struggling with them.
Now, just quickly back to Japanese knotweed and broom, what I'm really quite wonderfully amazed by is there are some discoveries that they have some phenomenal medicinal qualities. So all of a sudden, Japanese knotweed is popping up here and there in our lives in North America. And guess what? Japanese knotweed is one of the plant medicines being used by pharmaceuticals even to treat Lyme disease, which also is becoming, unfortunately, too common in our area. Don't you find that amazing?
I do find that amazing. I mean, one of the things about knotweed, like all rumex and rhubarb and everything, is it's got a lot of calcium oxalate, which has got, problems for kidney stones, etc., like spinach does too. But, it just seems like there is a world of biochemistry unexplored in most things. I mean, the literature is full of reports of weeds, especially deep taprooted perennial weeds that inject their biota into compacted soils, loosening it and allowing for a new set of fauna to be delivered to the depths. And this breaking up of that compaction is vital. I mean, we've done it for so many years, on thousands of years on arable soil where we plowed it and made a till pan. I mean, that compaction is broken up by the weeds, and they also detoxify. And so the idea that we've got all of this chemical now spread on arable land, what do you say we let farmers who are on the Monsanto Roundup Ready cycle wouldn't be able to do this, but if you let it go weed fallow for as much as a decade, then all of those compacted till layers would be released.
Well,
and also all of those persistent organochlorinates and sulfates and the ammonium would be broken down as well.
It just, talking to you just really reminds me of how much we as humans are affecting our own ecosystem, that we're part of our ecosystem. I mean, even the broom blossoms, herbalists are collecting those.
And the bees are collecting the pollen.
And the bees are collecting the pollen, but the blossoms are used for kidney health as a tea. So thanks so much for helping us with getting a different perspective on things, Steve. It really helps shift our thinking about plants in general. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Not at all. Any old time, Luke.
Okay, look forward to talking to you again, Steve.
Right.
We've been talking with Steve Mooney, a biologist from Campbell River, just helping us to get another perspective on those plants that we seem to love to hate. Hey, be sure to check out our weekly Gabbing About Gardening Zoom gathering for gardeners. It's every Monday at 3:30, and we present a garden teacher and a new topic for discussion. It's free, it's informative, it's inspiring. Just go to our Gabbing About Gardening Facebook page to get all the information. And if you've missed any of our weekly Gabbing About Gardening radio shows, just go to cortezradio.ca and you'll see the podcasts that are beautifully put together by our producer, Brian McKinnon. And we have a Gabbing About Gardening YouTube channel now with recordings of our weekly Zoom gatherings. There's so much going on, so many events going on. And coming up next, our next guest, like me, is an avowed compost junkie, I admit it, Melissa Rickey. She's the go-to gal if you want to know anything about bokashi-style composting. I'm telling the truth here, Melissa. Your relaxed and energetic style always makes me smile. I love gabbing with you. And today we've reached you around your garden in the Tiber Bay area of Cortez Island. Thanks so much for taking the time to gab with me today, Melissa.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just start with you telling us what's going on in your garden right now.
Oh, my gosh. Okay, well, I just came in from the greenhouse, so I'm just preparing. It's a new greenhouse that we've just built, and so I'm getting ready to plant that. I've been planting, continuing to pop fruit trees in the ground wherever I possibly can. I just planted an apple in my small, I call it small. My veggie garden is bursting with my ambitious projects. So I'm always looking for a way to be really efficient with space. And so I'm trying an Espalier apple on my garden fence and an Espalier pear. So those are new. And I've been going around to the fruit trees that I planted last year and the year before and planting all sorts of things all around the foot of the fruit tree. I planted some comfrey for chop and drop. The ones that I'm planting some beneficial insect attractors. My peach that struggles with leaf curl from time to time, I've just put a bunch of rosemary and lavender under it. I feel like a little fairy just popping around to echinacea I've been planting around my fruit trees. Some of my trees are not in a larger fenced area. They're individually caged, and the deer like to come right up to that metal fence and try to stick their noses in. So I've also been planting nettles around the cage.
Oh, good idea. Oh, I'm impressed. Of course, they don't last all season, but, the idea of planting around the base of the fruit trees, that is a really great idea. I did put garlic in because I had some nasty little worms around the base of my cherries and apples last year, but I love the chop and drop comfrey concept, and that would... Wow, that's smart. I want to hear how that turns out for you. Have you done that before?
I haven't done it before. I know it's a little controversial. Some gardeners swear by it, and others say don't do it. I know that comfrey has a long tap root, whereas the trees are relatively shallow rooted. So I don't think they'll be competing for that in that way.
Well, I've been reading about the exudates and the other phytochemicals that a lot of plants, such as comfrey and echinacea, have that actually feed the microbes of the soil. So you may be doing a really great companion planting. We always think in terms of competition, but plants really like to be together.
Yeah, I feel like this is a natural evolvement of my garden philosophy where I'm getting more to that.
I like it. We don't hear a lot about that. We've all been raised as gardeners that, you want the Mr. McGregor look. You pull everything out. I mean, that guy didn't even mulch.
Yeah. Yeah. I've totally, just in the last year and a half, I've completely changed my aesthetic. To embrace much more mulching. I used to really, in the professional gardening world, there's definitely different aesthetics that different clients prefer. And one that's been strongly preferred for years is that black sea soil all around the plants. Mm-hmm. And I used to call it putting on the little black dress. Like, it's so beautiful how when you have a frame of that around all of the different types of foliage in an ornamental garden. But really, now I look at that and I just go, ouch, for all the soil microbes that are being baked in the sun. Right at that level where you want them to be live.
Isn't it amazing how we shift and grow? I mean, it's almost like the plants are starting to communicate with us about what they want. Well, certainly there's some fabulous books out. I'm reading a book right now by David Montgomery about soil microbes and exactly what you're talking about. Also, don't you love this movement called wilding, where people are, having wildflowers growing 2 feet tall instead of grass. And there's just a lot more, what's the word, permission to do things like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think as with so many things, like, I don't know, for me, there's the aesthetic part. So that's a shift from a more formal way of doing things and liking the certain looks. And then but it's so informed by logic when you make these shifts too, that once you know what's going on behind what you can see with your eyes, it's so encouraging to do it differently, and you see the beauty in that, and it's deeper.
True. That invisible world that we walk on every day, it's teeming with life and microorganisms, and you're really getting in touch with that. Hey, just really quickly, we need to wrap up in a minute, but what are you facing as one of your biggest challenges so far this year?
One of my biggest challenges.
It's a problem, are you?
Oh, I just had the most amazing thing. Okay. Well, my biggest challenge was rats eating all my brassicas.
Bummer.
All my brassica seedlings, because I have the cabbage by the second and third years of my garden. The cabbage worm had found me, the cabbage moth that lays those eggs at the base of the brassicas, and then you just see this wilting plant, and it looks like it was eaten by a little beaver. I have that pest in my garden, and I was using Remay, but because my garden's on the ocean, it's super windy, so I really needed to stretch the Remay very tightly onto a structure. A hooped structure that I built for my brassica beds. And I also had ravens and starlings. So I put netting on top of the Remay. So I had those on my brassica beds, and I thought, okay, I'm protecting against these pests. And what I was doing was creating really wonderful habitat where rats felt very comfortable at the salad bar.
No.
They just dug under the edges, and like in a night, all my brassicas would be gone. I don't mind sharing a bit, but 80% loss is not where it's at. So I was talking to Noah at the Whaletown Garden Center, and he suggested for the cabbage moth using lime all around the base of the brassicas, that granular lime that's kind of like, it looks like sand, kind of, because she apparently doesn't like laying her eggs on that, and making like a collar all around the stem. So I took the Remay off of the structures. I left the netting to keep the starlings off. I put the lime to keep the moth from laying her eggs. And now the sky is my best friend, because those rats do not feel like feeding under there anymore. So it was like this really cool process of elimination.
Wow. And brassicas do love that pH. Hey, Melissa, thank you so much for telling us about what's going on in your garden. I always learn so much, and it's such an upper to be with you. I hope you'll join us again on another Gabbing About Gardening session.
I definitely will.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa. That's Melissa Rickey gabbing with us from her beautiful garden on Cortez Island. And that's our show for today. Gabbing About Gardening will be back next Tuesday at 11:30. Deanne Brussel will be gabbing about her new community snack and bouquet garden in downtown Courtenay. And garden teacher Connie Kuramoto from Gardens on the Go is going to gab about what we can be planting now. It is nearly mid-May. After all, we can start planting more. We're going to gab also about the importance of mulching and how to successfully transplant seedlings. There's so much to gab about with gardeners, and do remember to join us on Facebook and Instagram and every Monday on Zoom when we host the Gabbing About Gardening Zoom gathering. And next Monday, we'll gab with Aaron Stevens, the co-founder and owner of Nature's Path Foods. He's going to give us an up-close and personal tour of his own organic edible landscape in Vancouver. You can get all the details on our Facebook and Instagram page. Hey, thanks so much for being with us today. And a big thank you to producer Brian McKinnon. I'm Lucretia Shanfarber. This is CKTZ Cortez Radio 89.5 FM. Thanks for tuning in. Now go outside and get dirty.